Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event, Immutability versus Ransomware, Securing Your Last Line of Defense Against Data Loss. This event is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. And now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be an educational event for you, so we encourage any and all questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. We'll have team members responding to questions during the live event and also reviewing questions afterward. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources for download. They include a link to a page where you can request a virtual meeting about Rubrik and Optiv. And I should also mention that all attendees who participate in one of those meetings will receive a Theragun mini percussive massager. So be sure to check those out. You can also find links to the Actual Tech Media Event Center and the Actual Tech Media Guerrilla Guide Book Club. So I encourage you to check out those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. So if you're watching this webinar on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. If you are the winner, you can choose to donate the value of that gift card to one of our selected charities. And thanks to generous prize winners on previous Actual Tech Media events, thousands of dollars have been donated to charity. So thank you in advance if you make that choice today. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found at actualtechmedia.com. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So I'm excited to introduce you to our speaker today. It's Josh Kleen. He's Enterprise Sales Engineer from Rubrik. And now we're going to turn things over to Josh.
Hi, my name is Josh Kleen, and I'm a Senior Enterprise Solutions Engineer here at Rubrik. It's no secret that organizations are under attack. For years, ransomware and malware have been problems, but since the COVID outbreak, that's increased exponentially. Organizations are now being forced to spend millions of dollars just to get access to their data back once they're hit. And the challenge is data is everywhere. It's not just in our primary data center where we're running virtualization platforms and in some cases physical systems. It's also the structured data that exists in our databases, the unstructured data that lives in our NAS platforms, and even legacy systems that exist on platforms like AIX and mainframe. But it's not just the primary data center that we have to worry about. It's our DR sites and even our remote offices. And of course, we can't forget the explosive growth of data that's living now in the cloud. But this data is not safe. The reality is we've done a lot of things as an industry to focus on keeping data safe from folks by keeping them outside of our four walls. I think it's safe to say nobody expects 100% prevention from an outsider trying to get through each of these different layers. It's infeasible and practically impossible. But we still have to have our perimeter security, our network security, our endpoint security, our application security, and each of those providing another barrier of entry when an outsider tries to get to our data. But the reality is they still do. Now, whether it's something that somebody does on the inside or whether it's a very good attacker that manages to worm their way through, the reality is they're after our data. They're after the crown jewels, the information that makes our organizations unique. And so if we accept and acknowledge that at some point something is going to get through, we understand the importance of saying that we've got to have a final last line of defense where data can be protected against cyber resiliency. This way, we have that final layer of protection so that if something happens, we know that above all else, our data is safe. So let's really look at what this means. What happens in the event of a ransomware attack? Well, it starts off simply enough. Somebody gets in, regardless of the path that they take, and they engage an application that begins locking the data. It encrypts everything. From there, a ransom note is typically received, and then organizations have two choices on how they wish to proceed. They can pay the ransom and get back immediately, or they can attempt to recover their data. Well, with ransoms today being measured well into the millions of dollars, even with cyber insurance, organizations are choosing to try to recover first. In fact, your cyber insurance probably mandates it. Well, typically then two work streams start off. One in your IT operations team and another in your security operations team. IT operations will focus on getting that data back. What do we need to do to recover? Security operations are going to work on understanding the forensics. How did they get in? What did they gain access to? What is encrypted? The challenge is that as solutions like Rubrik come to the market and bring with it immutable architecture that's logically air-gapped and is effectively immune to compromised backups, organizations today are still going after those legacy platforms and trying to hit the backup solution as well. This results in compromised backups. This results in folks not having a place that they can go and get their data from. And so now organizations are left with no choice but to pay. So even if your backups are safeguarded, what do you recover, right? How do you know what was hit? How do you know that they didn't exfiltrate data? That's the other big problem is now, even with immutable architectures and logical air and physical air gaps, data is still at risk of being exfiltrated and organizations are still being forced to pay. So how do you know what to recover? How do you know what was hit? And frankly, how long is it going to take to bring the data back online? Because the most expensive part of a data exfiltration or a ransomware attack event is not actually the ransom. More often than not, it's the downtime that that attack causes. So organizations oftentimes just pay. They pay because their backups were compromised. They pay because they think it's going to be faster. They pay because they don't know the blast area, or they pay because they don't want to risk sensitive data being exposed. So how do we solve this problem? This is why Rubrik focuses on security at the point of data. It's been a hallmark of who we are as an organization for quite a long time. And it begins with providing a unified platform that brings security operations and IT operations together. It continues with being able to guarantee the safety of the backups on the platform with a fully immutable architecture where the data is not even put online. We also give you the tools to be able to scope the attack to understand exactly where the ransomware has hit. We also have the ability to help discover sensitive data across your entire platform. Anything protected by Rubrik, we can go in and be able to identify specifically where that sensitive data exists. And we can help recover very quickly. In fact, our customers routinely measure RTOs in a matter of minutes. Gone are the days of multiple day recoveries. We can get data back up online in a very short period of time. So how does this work? Quite simply, Rubrik is a modern data protection platform where we take all of the legacy architecture that you would traditionally need and unify it into a single masterless scale-out platform designed for the modern era, designed with the threats that we now face in mind, with our always available data based on an immutable, append-only file system that we call Atlas. It's air-gapped, and it utilizes a zero-trust architecture to make sure that above all else, your data is safe. With our built-in forensics, we're able to help you understand the scope of your attack. We're able to help you understand what sensitive data potentially could be accessed. And with our global API integrations, we're able to help you with automation and scripting, as well as integrations into common SIEM and SOAR platforms, things like Palo Alto Cortex, things like ServiceNow. The list is very extensive. Finally, with the ability to bring data back online in a very short period of time, our instant recovery is foundational to who we are as a technology. All of this is based on what we call our data security framework and our rubric, Secure by Design. It's based on this idea that if you put all of these components together, you end up with an architecture that is completely immune to ransomware. It begins with our immutable file system. It ensures global end-to-end encryption. It requires not only security of the infrastructure, but security of the end user with capabilities like SAML and multi-factor authentication, enterprise, role-based access control, and logical multi-tenancy. But even that's not enough. We must have a zero-trust cluster design where absolutely nothing, not even the cluster itself, is trusted at all when data is exchanged. Coupling in retention locks and legal holds to ensure that even an administrator with full administrative rights cannot change retentions on locked policies so that we can prevent insider attacks or compromised credential attacks. And finally, audit and compliance and reporting is a must. If it can't be documented that it happened or didn't happen, then simply it didn't happen. Let's dig into some of these. It begins with encryption. In many ways, we try to prevent encryption, but it's encryption from the outside world that matters. See, we want to encrypt our data. We want to have it so that prying eyes cannot see it. And so Rubrik controls the encryption of the data across its entire life cycle. From the moment that the data is egressed off of the ingestion systems and brought into the Rubrik platform, for its entire life stored in Rubrik, whether that's on the primary appliance architecture or whether that's moved to long-term archive. Even when it goes to disaster recovery or cyber resiliency vaults, that data is encrypted both at rest and in flight using high levels of industry standard encryption. From there, the platform is fully immutable. And it's based on three key pillars of immutability. First and foremost, we have our distributed air-gapped immutable file system. And we'll dig into this a little bit more here shortly. But first and foremost, Atlas, Rubrik's proprietary file system, is an offline secure copy of the data. It is logically air-gapped so that an outsider cannot directly access the data itself. That file system is completely secured. It is a zero-trust cluster design. It is completely masterless. No one node has control over anything else. Everything is done in a scale-out architecture. And no trust is given to any resource, whether it be a physical resource like a node in the cluster, or whether it be an end user who is logged on with credentialed access. We don't trust anything. That includes through all of the APIs that Rubrik gives access to. Those APIs must be authenticated against as well before any type of script can run. So what does this really mean? Well, let's begin with zero trust cluster design. You see, there is no trust in the cluster at all. When the cluster is initially created and the nodes initially added to it and that foundational architecture is formed, the Atlas file system is created and distributed across the nodes in the cluster. This is easily and infinitely scalable to however many nodes are required to suit your requirements for data capacities. But no node trusts each other. Anytime data is exchanged between nodes, that first must be authenticated and validated using credentials created and not exposed at all between the nodes. So node-to-node validation is required and no user will ever see it. Once that is established, then the nodes are able to communicate, but authentication is near continuous. This also means that all of our users, when they come in, they must pass their security checks, which at a minimum is username and complex password. However, we strongly encourage our customers to engage multi-factor authentication, time-based one-time passwords, or other integrations allowing you to have that second set of cyber resiliency checks. Beyond that, our ZeroTrust and immutable file system, Atlas, is critical to the life cycle of data. You see, Rubrik designed Atlas from the very beginning to be a highly secure data file system. Now, if you think of most file systems, there are 4 basic functions. It's read, write, modify, and delete. Any file system can read data, write data, change data, or delete data. In Rubrik, the first thing we did is we intentionally removed modify. Our file system doesn't even understand how to change data. It is an append-only file system. We can read data from Atlas, we can write data to Atlas, and as a low-level credentialed process, our garbage collector is the only way to delete data. Now, Atlas is broken into 3 distinct levels, and this is critically important. The access and interface layers are exposed, and those are the ways in and out with data from our file system. But that's not where the data is stored. Once data is sent to Rubrik, it is then sent down a layer through internal APIs to our data management subsystem. This data management subsystem is not exposed to the outside world. It is where we capture the metadata from the data itself. It's where we assign and manage SLA policy. It is where everything that happens regarding that data's lifecycle, it's all done in the data management subsystem. The data management subsystem is the only area in Rubrik that has the ability to read or write data down to the core Atlas file system. This is done through what we call the Rubrik Reader-Writer Data Service. This data service is authenticated and is the only thing that has access to a closed internal API to move data down into Atlas. Once the data is down into Atlas, it's appropriately sharded, deduplicated, compressed, and wrote into Atlas and striped across multiple nodes in the cluster. But by doing this, we create a logical air gap between the data management subsystem and the core infrastructure so that it simply cannot be accessed from anybody, including Rubrik or anyone in the outside world. This creates a highly secure, cyber resilient data vault natively inside of the Rubrik cluster. We're so confident in this file system that as long as a user does not have compromised passwords, we've never had an incident where customer data was not able to be recovered in the event of a cyber attack. That's why we focus so heavily on security management and user authentication. Because if a user has the appropriate roles, and if a user has a weak password, and if that user does not have multi-factor authentication or time-based one-time passwords set up, then there is a risk that somebody could interject themselves into that workflow and cause harm. It's an insider attack, whether it is a true insider or whether it is someone spoofing credentials. This is why we are absolutely insistent with our customers that you enable multi-factor authentication, time-based one-time passwords, single sign-on, Active Directory integration, enforce password complexity and account lockout controls, and use local accounts with one-way hash functions for your most secure operations. See, simple things like setting up time-based one-time passwords, even supported with local accounts on Rubrik, so that you can prevent outsiders from gaining access to the system, is incredibly important. This is your only way to stop folks when compromised credentials come into play. From there, we've got to control roles and access control for these roles. The first way that we can do this in Rubrik is dividing users up into logical multi-tenants. There will always be those that have administrative global view. But if you're working with a team of SQL DBAs, do they really need to have visibility into non-related file VMs? Probably not. So let's segregate those views into logical groups so that those users only have visibility into the workloads and workflows that they need. Within each one of these tenants, then, you can grant rights to each user, whether that is administrative level rights or whether that is a custom defined user role that specifically says, this is what you can and cannot do, and the workloads that you can and cannot access inside of that multi-tenant organization. We always want to enforce the most restrictive access on our users. It's not enough just to say, hey, here's what you can do. We actually have to look at their role and identify what it is they should and should not be doing, and then lock them down as far as we can. But again, as I said earlier, if we can't prove it happened, it didn't happen. And so auditing and alerting are so important. Rubrik has its own internal logging and auditing system, but we also integrate with a number of external third-party applications like Splunk, ServiceNow, or any other API integrated logging system. You've got to be able to have alerting set up so that you can continuously monitor and be notified when things happen, as well as be able to go back in time and see events that occurred should something happen unexpectedly. The other thing that's incredibly important is time. Remember, we're managing the life cycle of data. Regardless of the backup platform, you must manage the life cycle of data and retention and policy across archive, across replication, across the core backup tenant. Time is so important, which is why Rubrik enforces NTP requirements when the cluster is brought online. We can put in multiple NTP services, and we can also ensure that they are Stratum 1 based time codes or time sources. This means that you've got access to an assured time source as well as internal time sources to help keep everything in sync. But that's not all that we do when it comes to time. Rubrik also monitors the time, and if suddenly we see a time jump, so if we know that it's the end of 2021 and all of a sudden it is now the end of 2050, we know that not enough seconds have passed to get us all the way to 2050, and we will not inherit that new time. You see, if somebody came in and did something as simple as adjusted the clock and we adapted that new time immediately, we could be potentially facing a global expiration of all policies and the data would be lost. That's a common attack vector on legacy protection technologies. This is why we made time such an important component of Rubrik, because time manages the life cycle of data. Another area to help ensure against data loss is using retention locks and legal holds. See, retention locks ensure that when data is brought into the system, its life cycle can never be shortened. If you require that data for 7 years and you engage a retention locked SLA policy, that data will be kept for a minimum of 7 years. There's no way to shorten it without engaging Rubrik support directly and having multiple people that were already pre-authorized send in signed and proven documents that this is a change we're looking to make. It completely prevents someone from coming in and shortening SLA policy. Just like that, legal hold also incredibly important so that you can take an individual backup and ensure that it never expires until that legal hold is released. All put together, these solutions create a solid capability for preventing data loss, whether that's from an external threat where someone comes in from the outside and tries to penetrate the data. Our masterless web scale, highly redundant architecture ensures that doesn't happen. We've closed all of the attack surfaces, and with our ZeroTrust cluster design, all communication is secured and encrypted. Our immutable file system ensures that data cannot be directly accessed, data cannot be changed, and we can quickly bring that data back online when you need it most. We also protect from internal threats, a rogue admin, even if it's just compromised credentials. Our enterprise role-based access control and our multi-tenancy ensure that users can only do the minimum required for their function. Administrators are prevented from coming in maliciously with hijacked credentials because of multi-factor authentication and time-based one-time passwords. And even if the worst happens and someone gets in, retention locked policies and legal holds keep that critical data safe. Altogether, this is why Microsoft has now engaged directly with Rubrik and has chosen Rubrik to be their cyber resiliency partner for ZeroTrust design. It's not just protecting the Microsoft applications that we use on premises today. It's about protecting the Microsoft applications and platforms that we're using in Azure as well. From core Azure instance protection to Microsoft 365 and all of the services that Microsoft 365 entails, Rubrik provides data resiliency across all of those platforms. What it comes down to is that you have the opportunity today to bring together a global set of capabilities to ensure data is safe. Cyber resiliency is critical. Ransomware attacks are real. If you haven't gone through one, consider yourself very lucky, because a lot of people have. And a lot of companies have either lost data or even spent millions of dollars to get it back. It's important to go through and understand just how important things like account security, roles and permissions, audit and logging, time, zero-trust architecture design, SLA retention lock policy. These are the items and technologies that are core to Rubrik as a company and the platform and the services and the capabilities that we deliver to our customers. We know your backup platform is the last line of defense against data loss. We take that seriously, and we deliver the capability to keep your data safe. Thank you again for your time today. My name is Josh Kleen, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, to your local Rubrik account team, or to your partner manager. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
Excellent. Great presentation, Josh. Thank you. And good stuff. Especially appreciate that detailed discussion and the architectural view of how you're using immutability and zero trust to protect data. Before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the drawing for the $300 Amazon gift card. And our prize winner is Jerry Nance from Texas. Congratulations to Jerry. We'll be in touch with you to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Josh Kleen for putting together a really informative presentation, Rubrik for making this event possible, and all of you for attending and for all of your questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.